At its peak, Borders operated hundreds of large-format stores across the United States, employed roughly 19,500 people, and sat at the center of American book retail culture. By September 2011, every one of those stores was dark. The company had been liquidated, not restructured, not acquired as a going concern, but simply wound down and stripped for parts. Meanwhile, the company that replaced it had been selling books online since 1995 and would eventually become the most valuable retailer on Earth. The question isn't just why Borders failed, it's why the gap between those two outcomes was so wide, so fast, and so permanent. Borders began in 1971 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, founded by brothers Tom and Louis Borders. The original insight was operational, a sophisticated inventory system that could match the right books to the right local market. Independent bookstores, at the time, relied heavily on buyer intuition. Borders treated selection as a data problem. That gave it a genuine edge in an era when physical shelf space and local taste were the primary competitive variables. The model worked because the problem it solved, connecting readers to a wide, well-curated selection, was real. Kmart acquired Borders in October 1992, and the chain was spun off as Borders Group, Inc. in 1995, headquartered still in Ann Arbor and carrying Walden Books as a subsidiary. In 1997, the company expanded into Singapore, then Australia and New Zealand. In 1998, it entered the United Kingdom and Ireland. Malaysia followed in 2005, and the United Arab Emirates in 2006 in partnership with the Al Maya Group. This was a company that looked from the outside like it was building something durable and global. The growth flywheel at this stage was the same one that drove big box retail broadly. Scale meant buying power meant better margins. Better margins funded more locations, and more locations reinforced the impression of permanence. Borders stores were destinations, large footprints, wide aisles, cafes in some locations, knowledgeable staff. For a certain kind of shopper in the 1990s, walking into a Borders was an experience that a small independent could not replicate. The format felt like the future. The peak of that cultural and commercial power arrived somewhere in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The company was a dominant force in American book retail, with international operations spanning multiple continents and nearly 20,000 employees in the United States alone. But the structural weakness that would eventually destroy the company was already forming at exactly this moment of apparent strength, and it had nothing to do with taste or culture or the quality of the stores. The crack was this: Borders outsourced its online retail operation to Amazon. Rather than build its own e-commerce infrastructure as internet shopping became viable, Borders handed that business to the company that would eventually make physical book retail obsolete. Amazon had been selling books online since 1995, the same year Borders was spun off as an independent public company. While Borders was opening stores on 3 continents, Amazon was learning everything there was to know about online book buyers, what they searched for, what they bought together, what price made them convert, and how fast they expected delivery. Borders gave its competitor a direct line to its own customers and called it a partnership. This is the decision that separates structural weakness from management choice. The internet was not an unknowable disruption in 2001 or 2002. It was a documented, observable shift in how consumers were beginning to buy media. The choice to outsource rather than build reflected a specific judgment that physical retail was the core business and online was a side channel not worth the capital. That judgment proved catastrophically wrong, but it was made under real constraints. Building a competitive e-commerce operation was expensive, technically demanding, and uncertain. The problem is that not building it was more expensive still. The unraveling accelerated on two tracks simultaneously. Online retail was capturing an increasing share of book sales, first at the margin, then at the center. And the digital shift went beyond e-commerce entirely. The rise of e-readers and downloadable content meant that the physical product itself, the book as an object sold in a store, was becoming optional for a growing segment of readers. Borders had built its entire enterprise around the physical object in the physical store. It had no meaningful position in digital. At the same time, the international expansion that had looked like ambition began to reveal its own fragility. In November 2009, Borders in the United Kingdom and Ireland collapsed into administration, with all stores closed by year-end and around 1,150 jobs lost. In June 2011, the Australian, Singaporean, and New Zealand operations went into administration as well. The domestic US business was already past saving. In July 2011, Borders in the United States was liquidated after failing to find a buyer. Not sold, not merged, liquidated. The remaining stores closed in September 2011. The aftermath was swift and clarifying. In September 2011, Barnes & Noble, Borders' longtime rival, which had managed its own digital transition with at least partial success through the Nook e-reader, acquired the Borders trademark and intellectual property. The Malaysian and Middle East franchise operations continued under renewed agreements with Barnes & Noble, and Almaya Group eventually purchased the regional trademark rights outright from Barnes & Noble in 2015, diversifying the brand into books, toys, and stationery. A 2013 attempt to re-establish Borders in Singapore failed. The Malaysian franchises closed in August 2023. What remained of a company that once employed nearly 20,000 Americans was a regional brand name in the Middle East, run by a group that had nothing to do with the original business. The 19,500 employees in the United States lost their jobs. The Ann Arbor headquarters that had anchored Borders Group for decades was gone. The physical infrastructure, hundreds of large stores in high-traffic locations, was dismantled rather than repurposed because the format itself had lost its reason to exist. Lol. The lesson here is precise, and it is not about being slow to adopt technology. Borders understood its own business very well. It had sophisticated inventory systems, a recognizable brand, genuine customer loyalty, and international reach. What it failed to understand was where the value in its business actually lived. The value was never really in the store. It was in the connection between a reader and the right book. That connection could be made more efficiently, more cheaply, and at greater scale online. And once Amazon understood that, the physical store stopped being an advantage and became a cost. Borders had leased hundreds of thousands of square feet on the assumption that the store was the product. When the product turned out to be the selection and the convenience, all of that square footage became liability overnight. The mechanism of failure was not a single bad decision. It was a strategic architecture built for one version of the market that remained fully committed to that architecture as the market became something else. Scale can feel like security. In the right conditions, it is. In a technology shift, scale in the wrong direction just means more distance to fall. What happens when the company that replaced Borders starts to face the same structural pressure from a new direction? That story is already underway.